Welcome to Bloomberg Law on Demand. I'm Pacchia. We're joined today by the CEO of China Hydroelectric and founding principal at the investment banking firm Kuhns Brothers, John Kuhns. He is also the author of China Fortunes, A Tale of Business in the New World. Welcome.
Thanks, Lee.
Very good to see you. Thanks for coming back in.
Good to see you again.
So, since last we spoke, one of the major developments on the world stage was, of course, the Japanese earthquake, tsunami, and subsequent nuclear crisis. Horrible, horrible events, to be sure. But the world is now left with a lot of questions on the way forward. How has the Japanese quake and resulting disasters been processed in China?
Well, they pay a lot of attention, Lee. First of all, it's obviously close by, and the Chinese have always followed events in Japan closely as a result. China has made a big bet on nuclear power. Right now, only about 1 to 2% of their capacity currently is nuclear.
Right.
But they'd like it to be 8 to 10% soon.
Right. That's exactly where I wanted to go next. Nuclear energy has been much discussed as of late. Germany last week said that they wanted to be off nuclear power entirely, I think, by 2020. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
What's going to happen with China? Are they going to slow down production?
China can't afford to take a Germany route, Lee. They just need every kilowatt hour they can produce. But what they are doing is officially they're slowing down. They're not going to issue any new construction permits this year, they say. That's an official policy. I think on a practical basis, they'll reissue those permits later. But they're going to institute new procedures. They're very mindful of safety. Their safety record in nuclear so far is excellent. And they're just going to have to take a go-slow approach. But ultimately, they've got a big bet on nuclear, and that's going to remain.
How easy or difficult is it to build a nuclear power plant in China? Is the regulatory framework in any way comparable to what it is in the United States? Do they have tighter regulations, looser? What does the playing field look like when...
You know what's interesting? One of the only companies that was allowed to thrive and prosper all through the Civil War and chaos era of the earlier 20th century was Westinghouse. Westinghouse had a great relationship in China, was allowed to stay there. Westinghouse is there now, and the regulatory environment and the construction and procurement environment in China for nuclear power, I would say, is more streamlined than the United States because it's essentially handled at a central level in Beijing. And for that reason, I think it's a more efficient system than we have here.
So we'll see more nuclear power plants in China, but they're going to be built at a slower rate.
They're planning 30, Lee. Whether they get them done is anybody's guess. They are going to build them slower, but they've still got to have them.
We were talking before. We're going to switch gears now and talk about the outlook for inflation. Much discussed over the past week or so. Food prices are going up. Wages are also increasing. It seems as if the price of everything in China has just skyrocketed as of late. When you walk the streets in China and do business over there, you're over there for large parts of the year. Is this the change that's palpable on the street level, or is it just something that's reflected in the data?
It's palpable, and I'm not sure it's all accurately reflected in the data, but I can tell you I have...
How so? Is it underreported, or...?
I think it's underreported.
Yeah.
I think the inflation problem in China is far worse than they let on.
Are they running, I know you're not an economist, but in your opinion, are they running the risk of entering a hyperinflationary environment?
I think there's a risk of that. I do believe that. And in a way, Lee, China is its own worst enemy because it's consuming the foodstuffs and the natural resources that are the biggest culprits in driving this inflation up. And that appetite is voracious.
Has the government been on top of this problem, or?
I don't think they can be. I mean, basically the big problem is everybody wants to become a member of the middle class, and you're talking about hundreds of millions of people.
Yeah, tough stuff. We also have manufacturing numbers coming out, I believe on Monday, that suggested that manufacturing grew at the slowest pace in the last 9 months. Some have pointed to this data and said that Chinese economic growth is cresting. Any truth to that statement?
That could be in part true. Hate to waffle.
That's a big turning point.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you, in terms of what we experience, it's definitely harder to borrow money. And as a result, that river of cash that built lots of direct plant and so forth is slowing down. On the other hand, I think China can't turn off the spigot so much that the economy hiccups. So they're going to have to turn the spigot on, I would think, Lee, later in the year.
Mm-hmm. In looking at the country over the long-term time frame, people have spoken about a shift where the nation is fundamentally changing from a large producer of goods to a society that is based on a consumption model. Where is this transition, in your opinion, today?
Well, first of all, Lee, long term, I just don't see it personally. I do believe that China has a growing middle class, and yes, those people want first toothpaste, then an automobile, etc. Are they ever going to be the voracious consumers that, let's say, this country has shown where, 70% of the appetite for goods and services comes from consumers? I just don't see it. I think there's something in the DNA there that's going to prevent people. People are basically more frugal there. I think they're more disciplined, to be somewhat partial about it. But to think that those people are going to, let's say, plug that gap, that consumption gap that's going to take to shift, I just don't see it.
So when you're doing business in China, what's the top of your radar, so to speak, for the next 2 or 3 months? I mean, for me, as an outsider looking in, I looked at the energy issue and inflation. What keeps you up at night? What are you dealing with on a day-to-day basis mostly?
Well, in terms of the top of my radar, Lee, it would be tariffs for electricity, because my biggest investment there is my hydroelectric power company, China Hydroelectric Power, and we haven't had a tariff increase since 2009. In the meantime, the coal companies are getting tariff increases. They're all still losing money, and their tariffs are much higher than ours. The reason those tariffs haven't gone up, inflation. One of the biggest causes of inflation, the Chinese believe, is things like utility prices. So they've tried to tamp them down. It's not working. The Chinese coal-fired industry is losing its shirt. And if they get an increase, our guess is we should get one pretty soon as well.
Do you think that's going to happen?
I do. I think even later this year, the hydro sector will get paid more for every kilowatt hour they produce. That's a personal opinion. Now,
as you keep a foot in both worlds and you talk to people who are observing the situation, what do people get wrong most often about Chinese and U.S. relations?
Well, I think people largely, Lee, go back to the kind of the two global power concept that we had once upon a time with the USSR and think same thing is going to happen with
that they're
China.
just stepping in for the
No
Soviet
way.
Union.
It's a completely different country. They want to make money. They're very, I believe, concerned themselves about security risks, but not to the point where they're going to get overt around the rest of the world like, let's say, the USSR did in the 50s and 60s. I just don't see it. I think they want to be our friends. I think we should be theirs. And I think there's a lot more value to cooperating than not.
All right. Well, we'll have to see how it goes. John, I want to thank you for coming in. This was a pleasure.
Thanks, Lee. Good to see you.
Good to see you. That's John Kuhns. He's the CEO of China Hydroelectric, and he's also the founding principal of Kuhns Brothers. If you'd like to learn more about the issues we just discussed, go check out our offerings on BloombergLaw.com and also on the Bloomberg Terminal. I'm Pacchia. Thanks for watching.